Hello. Today we're doing a studying stream on metaphor. During the week, I was studying the concept of metaphor. I watched an entire course on metaphor by George Lakoff. So this is the course, 10 lectures. I discovered this channel just the last week, and there are so many amazing lectures. I already have desire to watch like at least 3 or 4 different courses of lectures in linguistics. But anyway, so today I'm not going to talk a lot about this course, since you may just go and watch these lectures by yourself. The name of the channel, Mehran Shar. So there's 10 lectures on cognitive linguistics, but mostly these lectures are about metaphors. So you may see it in the titles. But no, the first titles are not about metaphors. But actually, yeah. Well, the guy is one of the world-class experts on metaphors, probably one of the most influential scientists on metaphors. He studied the concept for 50 years. And in this course, he goes on talking about all sorts of ideas, not only about metaphors, but also about politics, about some, arguments in linguistics, about different theories. And I would say that, from my experience, I don't know much about linguistics, even though I, studied it for the last 4 years, even probably 5 years. Yeah, since I started studying English, I engaged in linguistic. I've been engaging in linguistic more and more, but still I don't have a lot of knowledge for it. But I have lots of knowledge in philosophy. And there's a lecture by this guy where he talks about philosophy, saying that, this understanding of metaphors and that, what he calls embodied mind, like new vision, how we think, it wasn't present in, Western philosophies. He says, like, he takes pre-Socratics, then Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Kant, and Anglo-American philosophers, analytic philosophers. And like there's an entire book which he wrote with another guy in the end of 90s, I guess. And in this book, he goes through all these metaphors present in philosophies, in Western philosophies. And he basically explains why it doesn't work, and that all this idea that truth is out there, that concepts which we make are in the world, not in our brain, it's all false. And he says, like, in all Western philosophies, there was no serious philosophers who really said that, who really saw that this is true. But in reality, like, yeah, basically, for example, now simultaneously I'm studying Nietzsche, and I'm doing studying streams on Nietzsche, and so I memorize Beyond Good and Evil. Each week I take a paragraph and I memorize it, and then I spend a couple of hours, sometimes less, sometimes more, talking about these paragraphs. And obviously, Nietzsche, you may see exactly what George Lakoff is talking about, that our ideas and in all philosophies, they basically are evolved by, there are certain impulses. Nietzsche calls them impulses, like instincts. And these instincts, they all want to philosophize. So essentially, when there's one instinct, for example, let's suppose you want to be rich, and this desire, like, it doesn't mean that richness itself is what matters. There's a certain instinct in you, and this instinct wants to, control all your other instincts. And the desire to be rich is basically, maybe some ambition, lust, whatever, avarice. And when this desire overthrow all other impulses and starts controlling, like, this, like your behavior, it basically creates a certain philosophy for itself. So it has to justify itself. It has to create justification, explanation, whatever, theory, proving that this is the only one legitimate thing to do for you and for everybody. So if you look inside yourself to try to do some kind of introspection, you will see that your favorite behavior, or maybe several types of behaviors, are dictate their rules to the rest of your body, to the rest of your, behaviors. And essentially, like when there are several types of behaviors, that's probably okay. There's no big chance that real philosophy will emerge out of it. But if you are preoccupied with one particular idea, let's say like you are preoccupied with thinking, like Descartes was preoccupied with thinking, you may create a philosophy trying to justify this activity, and you may write, lots of books saying that this is, this is what real philosophy is about. It's about thinking. It's about, whereas thinking, what it is, like you try to justify a certain type of behavior and say that this is like the absolute form of behavior, and it's actually a certain impulse in your body, in your brain. So you have a certain desire, it overthrows other desires, and it creates its own philosophy. So essentially this idea about metaphors and about mind and language and thinking and making concepts and truth. So it's not out there. It's basically something which your brain creates. But the funny thing is that this guy, like, he basically claims that he and another professor of philosophy discovered that this was, something unique and original. Whereas, you read Nietzsche, and Nietzsche just all, like not all, but most of what he says in his later books is exactly, he tries to point out that there's no such thing as independent thinking. There's like all thinking is based on your biology. All thinking is based on your, like, on the order of your impulses, of your instincts. So if there's no just one instinct, of course, there's many of them. But the point is, which one of them is the most important, and which one of them dictates its logic and its rules to other instincts. In other words, which one of them becomes a tyrant and creates its own philosophy if necessary. But yeah, like in terms of philosophy, I discovered this guy last Saturday, probably, yeah, like a week ago. And I watched a couple of his lectures, not from this course, but from some other lectures on YouTube, and I was amazed by what he said. So I was so inspired by his ideas, and I thought that I discovered something like so great. Since, well, first of all, he is a great speaker. He is a great, he is a brilliant speaker. He just interesting to listen to what he says, even if sometimes I couldn't understand what he said, but still it was really like it had a profound impact on my understanding of certain things. And it was one of the reasons. Another was that I was studying exactly like this metaphors and language and these ideas. And when I listened to his lectures, it helped me to figure out something that I couldn't figure out for probably a couple of weeks or maybe a month. And it fitted exactly like at a certain time, and I was like amazed. So, and after that, I decided that I'm gonna, I didn't have an intention to watch lectures, some courses of lectures by this guy, since I was watching lectures by John Searle, and I watched 2 courses of lectures before, and I was going to watch another course of lecture. But then after discovering this guy and his ideas about metaphors, I decided to dive in and like understand better. But after I watched 10 courses of 10 lectures, and it's, as you may see, each lecture is an hour and 30 minutes, and approximately it's 15 hours. So it took me 15 hours, but I was watching them on a higher speed. So it took me not 15 hours, but 10 hours. And I watched all of them basically in 3 days. So today I watched 2 lectures. Yesterday I watched 4 lectures in 4 days. Yeah, and the first day I watched 2 lectures, and the second day I watched 2 lectures as well. And now I would say that most of, I'm no longer so inspired, and I no longer see this guy as profound thinker, even though in his field, which is cognitive linguistics, yeah, I think he's very, he went so far, like in the understanding of linguistics and cognitive linguistics and all these metaphors or ideas related to metaphors. But in philosophy, I wouldn't say that he understands a lot and he knows what he is talking about, even though he wrote a book, and it's still not sufficient. And there are some some funny examples. Right now I just finished watching the last lecture, and in the end of the last lecture he was arguing about, he was talking a lot again about philosophy, and there was something really fascinating, but now I'm afraid that I can't reproduce it. So there was an idea that I catched him on a certain paradox. So he was talking something about the mind, that our perception of the world, all our concepts, we understand them through our brains. There's no knowledge out there. There's no concepts out there. There's no truth out there in the world. So all truth, all meaning is subjective. It's a part of our, it's a part of our biology, part of our brains. Like our brains create the truth, to create the meaning. And there was a funny idea that he was talking again about philosophy, saying that there's nothing in philosophy nobody talked about in philosophy before. All philosophers were wrong because they believed in rationality, in pure rationality, that there's no, body has nothing to do with that. And and also he claimed that we started understanding it just right now, just quite like, in last, he said he was studying linguistics for 40 years in 2004. I mean, now he's studying it for 60 years. But anyway, so he said, like, now we understand so much. Now we reach this profound point. Now we know everything. Neuroscience tells us everything about, how we make concepts, how we understand the world. And the truth was that he was so blind in this sense that he thought that there's real progress in knowledge on a common level. So in common level science, again, he thought there's progress in science, and there's some outside world like science, which we make by analyzing world and making some concepts. And he like claims that there's science which actually like real, whatever it may be, cognitive linguistics. And at the same time, he says, no, it's all subjective. Like meaning is in my head. Essentially, that's what he says. Meaning is in my head, in our heads. And why it's paradoxical? It's paradoxical because you say that like you can find the truth in outer world. You can make it on your. You have to make it by yourself. So unless you are able to get to this point where like lake of God, you can't actually understand the truth. And simultaneously he says there's science, now we know everything, and it's kind of objective science, which is insane. That he is not a fool. I mean, he is a very smart guy. He was studying this field for 60 years. He knows what he's talking about in linguistics, but he doesn't see such a simple thing, which is like he came to this realization on his own. And anybody else who studies, let's say, linguistics, like if I study linguistics from the beginning, let's say, and I study lake of spheres, I won't be able to grasp what he grasps simply because I don't have enough experience. So I have to study for 40 years to get to the point where he got, or maybe I can do it faster. But the idea is, again, this is me who must study linguistics, who must study all these concepts and make sense out of them. And when he claims that, again, that we just came to realization of all of that, it's like, again, he came to the realization of, like, he uses a pronoun, he says we instead of I. And this is the biggest, I guess, it leads to misunderstanding. Since if he said, I came to realization, I know now what's going on, I like developed this science, it will sound more real, more authentic. But when he says we, and then he claims that in outer world there's nothing, like nobody understands, like only you understand what is truth, how concepts are made. Like there's no concepts in outer world. But in the same time, he said there's metaphors, and we use these metaphors to understand what's going on. All right, I think it's too complex. Yeah, and I'm trying to express in a kind of metaphorical sense, but it was very, very funny to see it, like to see this mistake. Since again, we'll go back in history, like 150 years, and we see that Nietzsche perfectly understood everything what George Lakoff was talking about. And even though there was no neuroscience at this moment, even though there was no tools which like fMRI or other tools which we may use to measure brain activities and do some work, still Nietzsche could understand what was going on, and he expressed it through lots of metaphors. And for this understanding, he didn't need to have certain tools. He didn't need to have fMRI. He grasped it intuitively, and then he explained it. And Lakoff says, no, that all Western philosophy is just, they all were wrong. Like all philosophers whom you know, of course, since you are looking for, like, it depends on where are you looking, like not where. What are you looking at? Like what you're trying to find. So, and another thing which made me kind of disappointed in this man was that he spent 60 years just trying to prove one concept. He discovered, like in relation to metaphors, he started studying them, I guess, not like in 1960s, but maybe later 1970s. I don't remember exactly, but the idea is that he discovered a certain idea, he came to a brilliant insight. And then he spent the rest of his life, basically 50 years, studying certain scientific fields in order to prove this idea. So he just became so specialized. And yeah, it reminded me another example with the guy named Fraser, who also discovered some ideas like mythology, religion, science. I guess it was one of the most profound insight that we evolve we evolved to science from, like, first was mythology, then there was religion, and then like science is it's an evolutionary process. And he spent also 50 years in libraries trying to get as many examples as possible, to learn some cultures, to prove his theory. And exactly what Lakoff does is almost like the same. So he sees something that very few people can see, and then he, like, to prove that it's true, that it's like he tries to basically get as much evidence as possible. He doesn't stop. Like, let's suppose he finds 10 examples, and so these 10 examples, they're actually valid. I don't need to go further and make 1,000 examples to show that this is true. But he doesn't stop there. He says, no, I'm going to find like 10,000 million examples and show that I am right. Yeah. So instead of trying to disprove it, so the point, like, he tried to disprove Chomsky's theory, like generative syntax. And he basically was one of the creator of an opposite direction in linguistics, like generative semantics. And he was a pupil of Chomsky, and he, like, as he mentioned, he worked on the dissertation. He he's done he did lots of work to develop Chomsky's theory, generative syntax. But then he deviated from Chomsky and started developing his own ideas, and he found lots of examples which disproved Chomsky's theory. And he showed them in the first Yeah, it's in the first and the second lectures, all these examples, and they're fascinating. I'm probably going to watch them later. But essentially, again, what I'm mostly kind of surprised is that it's like 50 years. I can't imagine, like 50 years for me, it's unbelievable. Like last 5 years, I've learned English language, for example, and for 50 years, I may assume that if I go on studying in the same way, in 50 years, I may learn basically 10 languages to the level which now I half in English. And well, maybe not as good, since in next 50 years I'm not going to be able to use my intelligence and my brain as well as I can do it right now, since now I'm kind of young, and in 50 years I'm going to be old. But the point with this guy, and of course I started studying it like quite recently in terms of my age, so it was like I was 30. But if I started doing that 20 years, but again, the idea is uh, everything this guy said, like these 10 lectures, these 15 hours of talking about metaphors, about politics, about love, about relationships between different frames, conceptual understanding, linguistics, grammar. Like it looks as if it's possible to learn all of this just, well, of course, yeah, to learn all of this just in how long? Well, in a couple of years, let's say, but not 50 years. But for him, of course, he made all these researches, and it's not the same. So the point is, like, you start studying, you start to exploring a certain field, and of course you make certain concepts, you can write your books, and then you stick to your examples, to your ideas, you more and more believe in your ideas, and finally you have the entire body. But essentially what's important is just few basic concepts. And he repeats himself, like I've noticed, like watching these lectures, Searle, this guy, Lakoff, they repeat themselves all the time. Like in these lectures, for example, there were examples which have been used for even for more than 5 times. And these examples, essentially these examples are about politics, about like different views, such as conservative views on politics, and progressive views on politics, or progressive, is it like left and wing and right? And now I didn't try to memorize anything, but now I can easily explain what was going on and what is probably going on right now in American politics, even though I'm not interested in American politics at all. But still, like according to this guy Lakoff, so the idea is simple: the nation is like a family. And I guess it was, again, he says that it was an insight which he had in 90s when he was not even in 90s, when he was studying some political claims and programs, some protocols, and he started making sense, try to make sense out of these programs like abortion, taxes, whatever else. And finally, he came to a realization that they use different frames, and these frames are based on an understanding of the politics and nation as a family. So he started mapping, like using these concepts, like, okay, government is father, for example, and citizens are children. And he has two models. Like one model is in this conservative model, where there's a strict father, or kind of tyrannical father, who basically considers his family as his children, for example, as inherently bad, but he wants to make them good. He wants to discipline them, to teach them how to live in the world. And this father knows what's good, what's right, and he has to punish children, give them physical punishment, and this physical punishment is called tough love. And all conservatives understand this metaphor. And essentially, he goes on and talk about it more, saying that this is one model, and there's another model where nurture and parent, and this more progressive model. and he is more warm to this model. He says that, it's more, well, since he is a progressive, or he considers himself a progressive, or he considered himself as a progressive in 2004, but it seems he gave more, value to the second model. But anyway, so today, as I said, I'm going to study the concept of metaphor, and what I'm interested in is just to read an article on Wikipedia, probably some other sites, to understand better what it is and how it works. I've already prepared for about 9 questions or 8 questions. Most of these questions are, I kind of made them up. I was walking today and I had free time, and I was thinking about metaphors and basic questions like, what is a metaphor? How do metaphors influence our life, our behavior? How do we understand them? And some other questions. But anyway, now I'm not going to answer these questions. It's not important. For me, what's important is to read some basic stuff on metaphors and understand what it is. And, even though I'm already I'm not an expert in metaphor, but yeah, I've invested 15 hours listening to the world expert on metaphor. Okay, this site, I guess I'm going to check this one to see the origin of this word. It's for now, it's enough. So metaphor, figure of speech by which a characteristic of one object is assigned to another, different but resembling it or analogous to it. Comparison by transference of a descriptive word or phrase. Well, that's a that's very complex definition. Okay, figure of speech by which a characteristic of one object is assigned to another. So again, characteristics of one object. All right. Different but resembling it or analogous to it. Not the same. Comparison by transference of a descriptive word or phrase. Transfers, again, taking it from one frame and placing it in another. Late 15th centuries metaphors, plural, from French metaphora, Old French metaphora, and directly from Latin metaphora, from Greek metaphora, a transfer. So transfer, yeah. Transfer. Yeah, and like, what is a transfer? It may be a sort of abstraction, right? You take one thing and you basically transfer it. It's like, not transformation, but yeah, transfers. Yeah, there's a thing that has a quality. You take this quality and you transfer this quality to another thing. Like you may say, the girl is beautiful. Okay. Then you may say, the house is beautiful. So you may take a concept of beauty and transfer it to the house, or you may transfer it to anything you like. And yeah, that's transference, especially of the sense of one word to a different word, literally a carrying over from metapherein, to transfer, carry over, change, alter. To use a word in a strange sense, from meta over, across, pherein, to carry, bear. All right. So now let's go and read Wikipedia. Seems to be a short article, but as usual, since I'm talking too much, I'm trying to, understand just the introduction. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm gonna, read the entire article, since. Okay, let's go. A metaphor is a figure of speech that, for rhetorical effect, directly refers to one thing by mentioning another. Yeah, that's strange Like, so, well, figure of speech, okay, but there's a reason immediately, like for a rhetorical effect. Is it really true? Like, do we use metaphors for only for rhetorical effects? Like for lack of it will lack of for lack of it will be an absurd because he says we basically understand the world through metaphors. We think in metaphors, and rhetorical effect has very little to do with it. Oh, it may be used in this sense, but mostly it's not the purpose. But again, like who am I to talk about? Let's just take it literally, an example from Wikipedia. So a figure of speech. What is a figure of speech? Basically, it's an analogy or an expression, a certain way to present one thing. A figure of speech directly refers to one thing by mentioning another thing. Okay, rhetorical effect, figure of speech, one thing, like refers to one thing by mentioning another. All right, may make sense. One of another lectures here was on poetry, which I didn't mention when I was talking about this course of lecture. Yeah, like in this sense, it helped me to understand poetry much more deeper, at least in English language. So when I listened to his explanations and poetic interpretations, I really grasped something that I didn't understand before. Like for me, it's still hard to understand language, to understand it. I can understand scientific language. For me, it's so when I read articles on Wikipedia or when I listen to lectures, I almost always understand it fully. So if I watch one lecture for an hour and like 30 minutes, if I have enough attention, like if it's, let's say, the first thing which I do after waking up, like, I mean, if I have full energy, I can, just by paying attention, I can basically reproduce the entire lecture. So if I watch a lecture, then I sit and think for, let's say, 3 hours or 4 hours, I will basically reconstruct the entire lecture, and I can understand everything. Like when people in lectures, professors usually talk in a literal sense. But when I listen to speech in movies or in TV shows or in cartoons, often I don't understand what's going on there. And I don't understand it exactly because they use metaphors. There are so many, not idioms. I don't think that like idioms and metaphors are the same, but there's like metaphorical sense. And again, often I catch myself being unable to grasp like what does it mean. But anyway, okay, it provide or obscure clarity or identity or identify hidden similarities between two different ideas. It may provide or obscure clarity. It may provide or obscure clarity or identify hidden similarities between two different ideas. Yeah, I want to also mention before proceeding forward that before, like how I discovered the concept of metaphor, I was reading John Searle's book Expression and Meaning. It was the second book by John Searle which I read, and almost in the third part of this book, he discussed metaphors, and I was really not inspired, but I was again, like all words which come to my mind, they all are unsuitable. So I want to say astonished or surprised. No, it was like I read this book, and it explained the concept of metaphor very clearly, and I guess I figured something out. Again, I figured out something that I couldn't figure out before, and especially it's like like it's about meaning. So how we John Searle basically distinguished two theories of metaphors: Aristotelian theory and modern theory. In Aristotelian theory, it's just a comparison. It's exactly what's said here on Wikipedia's page. But in John Searle's, it's more like we make metaphors, and it's like our our, like, they all are subjective. Like when we make, I can tell more since most of it I already forgot, but at that time when I was reading, it was so like there was an interesting distinction, and I could understand this distinction, and then I decided to study more, like to find out what's going on, and then I discovered this guy and digressed a little bit from John Searle to George Lake, but okay, metaphors. So different ideas, right? It may provide or obscure clarity or identify hidden similarities between two different ideas. Metaphors are often compared with other types of figurative speech, such as antithesis, hyperbole, metonymy, and simile. Simile, I guess is the right. Simile. One of the most commonly cited examples of a metaphor in English literature comes from the All Worlds a Stage monologue from As You Like It. By the way, All Worlds a Stage. In this year, I memorized this monologue, and yeah, that's so familiar. And I find it after I listened to Lakoff, I had like today, I guess I had this idea that it's really nice to take like I now know, like I remember for about 10 poems which I learned this year, and I learned them from February to May. It doesn't matter. So I've learned 10 poems. I still remember them, but I never actually did this type of analysis. So I didn't try to analyze each phrase in a metaphorical sense, what it actually can represent. And today I was thinking, well, it's an interesting exercise. So whenever you have free time, basically you don't know what to do, or you just walk somewhere, or you're in a queue and you have to wait for, something, or you're in a bus, wherever, just you take a metaphor and you think about it, you take a poem and you think about it, try to analyze it in a metaphorical sense. I did it with Shakespeare 7 years ago. I remember I analyzed another monologue by Hamlet, To Be or Not to Be. Yeah, I didn't know English that time. Well, I memorized Shakespeare, but I couldn't speak English, and I couldn't understand anything, but I could memorize the monologue. And I remember I tried to explain the meaning of this monologue to my acquaintance who were drinking beer, and we started talking about it. And yeah, I went him through the entire, I translated everything from English to Russian. And then I tried to, find some metaphors, explain what each metaphor meant. And it was so fascinating. It took a couple of hours to get through this monologue, but it was very fascinating. And yeah, and I think now I want to do something like that too with poems which I memorized. But anyway, this quotation expresses a metaphor because the world is not literally a stage, and most humans are not literally actors and actresses playing roles. Well, how can you be sure? Well, yeah, because, some people are not actors. Some people are real, but what does it mean to be real? Yeah, well, just the scientific, Wikipedia tries to pretend that it's a scientific uh, encyclopedia, right? And it's a nice way to understand the world. It's a nice metaphor. It really helps to understand. Is it actually true? It's very hard to say. Like, what does it mean to be true? If you understand the world through this metaphor, it may be true. If you want to use another metaphor, if you want to say, like, use some scientific metaphor and say the world is a collection of particles or strings or whatever the hell there is in the world, which, interact in particular ways. There's some forces, there's some distances and space and time, etc. So it's also a metaphor. It's a metaphorical understanding. And which one of them is more true? Well, it depends on which one you prefer. There's no absolute true, but there's maybe different. Exactly, this is an example when you can take an expression, a metaphorical expression, and interpret it in many different ways. And you can say that one interpretation is absolutely true and another is absolutely false. So some of them will be more appropriate, some of them will be less appropriate. Another thing which comes to mind, and again, I was thinking about it today too. I remember times when I was listening to Russian music, and it was 2006, 2007. So I basically had a playlist and I listened the same songs every day sometimes for many times, not just a couple of times, but for many times. I listened to music for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, every day. And it was the same 100 songs. And some of them I like more, some of them I like less, some of them I could listen over and over. And I discovered that depending on the emotional state which I was in, and an activity which I was, doing, my understanding of these songs, which were full of metaphors, were different. So every time when I was, in a particular activity, like even in the same activity, when there was the same activity, I still could imagine these songs in a different way. So they always gave me different emotions and different ideas. And I found it very inspiring. You don't form one particular, you don't bind yourself with particular understanding. You may go deeper just by trying to figure out what it means, applying it in different domains, different fields, different areas. That's probably how later I came to writing poetry, since you take any experience, anything, and you may basically interpret it by mapping it to different fields, different experiences, different frames, and analyzing the first experience through the metaphors, through the ideas or concepts present in the second experience. So you take, for example, let's say this simple example like war and argument. So in war, there's attacks, there's defenses, there are attacks, there are defenses, there are strategies, there are tactics, there are winners, there are losers, there are, all sorts of all sorts of ideas and concepts. And the same in arguments. So we may see that in arguments, people also attack with try to attack somebody else's argument, try to protect an argument and give reasons. And the vocabulary. So if you take one frame and place it on another, you may enrich your understanding of one frame by applying concepts from a different field, from a different area. So in here, essentially, you may take anything what you try to understand, let's suppose you try to understand war or metaphor itself. You may take metaphor, you may take the frame in which metaphors are presented, and it's very hard to find it just randomly, just suddenly without preparation. But here, let's take something simple like war. So you take war and you transfer it to argumentation, or you transfer it to something else, like relationship may be also a war. Or you take love and consider it as journey, which is one of the famous one of the most frequent examples in these lectures by Lakoff. So that's how his study of metaphor started. One of his students came to the lecture, and she was crying, and she had a metaphorical problem with her boyfriend, and they started talking about it, and they discovered that love is journey, and this is a nice metaphor, and then they found some examples, and then there was lots of other things going on. But anyway, so metaphors, like understanding the world through metaphors, and Lakoff, he goes on and he says everything is a metaphor, like mathematics based on metaphors, science based on metaphors, philosophy based on metaphors. There's no any conceptual, any linguistic field free from metaphors. Everywhere are metaphors. And yeah, again, if you want to understand something better, you just place it in different fields and see how you can explain one idea through, placing it in a field of another idea similar to this one, and then trying to make sense of it. Yeah, I did it like in poetry. Again, it seems that Lakoff basically explained me what I was doing, even though I didn't I had an intuitive understanding, but I didn't have this conceptual theoretical model of what I was doing. Since when I wrote my dissertation in 2012, I did exactly the same. I took a government, and I took an idea like a human, let's say, it was exactly like this way of understanding something through metaphorical transference to different fields. So I take a person, like any person, and consider it like a person has mind and or reason. And reason basically it's let's suppose that what if government is a person? So what is a reason? A reason is law. Why it's law? Because it looks like law. So we do certain stuff, and reason helps us basically organize our behavior. And then I started thinking, actually, it makes sense. And then I started making an entire, I started finding some arguments, and I wrote how many 60 pages dissertation, 60 pages trying to argue. And then first I made this analogy, and then I disproved everything. I mean, I was talking about law and government, and essentially I said that there's no real understanding in science. So even though it seems that we understand what is government, what is law, what is a reason, but actually there's no real understanding, since we have lots of metaphors, and some people prefer metaphors from mathematics, some people prefer metaphors from psychology, some people prefer metaphors from physiology, and they all arguing about words, but yeah, and there's no absolute understanding. And then when I was writing poetry, I did it all the time. So you take a situation, like any situation in your life, anything, maybe just a dialogue, just a talk, and then you try to analyze this talk in terms of some other conceptual, frame. So let's suppose the talk was about politics, and there was some, arguments pro and against some particular things. So you try to conceptualize it in terms of something else. So like of again, family. So look, let's suppose that these arguments are maybe considered through this position, and those arguments through that position, and then essentially you have a better understanding. But anyway, okay, let's go on. I'm talking a lot, since I'm trying to basically, what I'm doing in studying streams, I try to understand better certain concepts, which usually I watch lots of lectures. So for example, now I have watched 10 lectures, and I didn't analyze them. It was just watching a lecture after lecture after lecture without thinking too much, but trying to pay as much attention as possible while watching. And then now I have time, so I'm trying to talk about metaphors, and there are some ideas which I grasped while watching these lectures, and I'm trying to apply these ideals in my analysis of the concept. So I'm trying to understand what I was watching through talking about it and realizing what was there. So basically it's like white studying streams, right? So I'm trying to study the concept of metaphor, and I'm trying to conceptualize everything which I have learned from previous work, previous studying, from watching lectures. And that's why sometimes it may be it may go off the rails, and I may just digress and talk about something else. It seems as if it doesn't refer to this studying stream, but actually for me it's perfectly, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I recommend you do the same thing. I mean, watching, I'm doing the studying stream not to show you certain ideas or to explain you anything or teach you that this is something that you have to understand. No, I'm trying to show you how to do the work. So this is a method. It's like a real scientific method, which uh, very few people are talking about, since very few people can understand how it works. So I basically developing my scientific method here. So what is the method? You watch lectures, you try to pay attention, you spend 10 hours, 15 hours, 20 hours, then you take a concept, you start recording a study in stream, and you basically talk about it for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, like as long as you can. And you're not trying to limit yourself with particular tasks. So your task is to understand the concept. You don't need to talk about anything in particular. So you go slowly through the text. But if there is something in your mind which you want to express, you shouldn't, okay, I shouldn't say it because it doesn't make sense here. No, you try to say everything. The point is like in your conscious, in your brain, when you study something, there are lots of information recorded, but you don't have an opportunity to develop this immediately. Or you may have, but again, it's like my method, how I work. So I prefer, sometimes when it's really important, I may watch a lecture and then think about it for a couple of hours to understand it better. But I can't do that in terms of every lecture which I watch, since now I prefer to take courses of lectures and watch them like as fast as possible. I don't want to, like if I really would study this course of lecture in university, it'll take me a month at least to get what's going on here. Whereas what I'm doing it in less than a week. So I take a course of lecture, watch it, then start talking about metaphors, and whatever was going on in my mind while I was watching this course of lecture, it just pops up when I record the study in stream. And I'm trying to give it like to explain it as clearly as possible. And it makes sense. So if you want to do the same, just do the same. Watch course of lectures, talk about it, record your study in streams, and see how it's going to work. Don't try to like learn something from me here. So what you may learn is just the method. What's important here is the method. It's not knowledge itself. Anyway, by asserting that the world is a stage, Shakespeare uses points of comparison between the world and a stage to convey an understanding about the mechanics of the world and the behavior of people within it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, according to the linguist Anthony Lieberman, the use of metaphors is relatively late in the modern European languages. It is in principle a post-Renaissance phenomenon. In contrast, in the ancient Hebrew Psalms around 1000 BC, around 1000 BC, one finds already vivid and poetic examples of metaphor such as "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield, and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." Yeah, I like this war metaphors like stronghold, take refuge, fortress, etc. Okay, other at the other extreme, some recent linguistic theorists view all language in essence as metaphorical. Yeah, this is exactly what Lakoff is talking about. Like all languages based on metaphors, and we basically express our understanding, and we understand the world through metaphors. The word metaphor itself is a metaphor. That's fine. Coming from a Greek term meaning to transfer, to carry across. Metaphors carry meaning from one word, image, idea, or situation to another, linking them and creating a metaphor. Okay, etymology, I already read it in different side parts of a metaphor. The philosophy of rhetoric, some guy wrote something. Okay, I'm not gonna like read all of this as a type of comparison. Allegory, antithesis. Okay, metaphor as metonymy. Subtypes. In rhetoric and literature, Aristotle. Yeah, there's Aristotelian view is still predominant. It's in Wikipedia. It looks like, yeah. There's no like I don't see any contemporary. Now I see it. Lake of finally conceptual metaphors. Some theorists have suggested that metaphors are not merely stylistic, but that they are cognitively important as well. In Metaphors We Live By, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson argue that metaphors are pervasive in everyday life, not just in language, but also in thought and action. A common definition of metaphor can be described as a comparison that shows how two things that are not alike in most ways are similar in another important way. They explain how a metaphor is simply understanding an experience in one kind of thing in terms of another, called a conduct, con, conduit metaphor. A speaker can put ideas or objects into containers and then send them along a conduit to a listener who removes the object from the container to make meaning of it. Thus, communication is something that ideas go into, and the container is separate from the ideas themselves. Lakoff and Johnson give several examples of the metaphors in use, including argument is war and time is money. Several examples. Like, I know when this article was written, but Lakoff gives thousands examples, like in his books. Oh, in his lectures, he doesn't give 1,000 examples, but he gives hundreds of them, but several. It's certainly not a nice word here. Metaphors are widely used in context to describe personal meaning. The author suggests that communication can be viewed as a machine. Communication is not what one does with the machine, but is the machine itself. Experimental evidence shows that priming people with material from one era will influence how they perform tasks and interpret language in a metaphorically related era. As a foundation of our conceptual system, cognitive linguists non-linguistic metaphors and historical linguists. Okay, so I got the basic idea. I got what I wanted to get, and yeah, there are different views, different ideas, but what's crucial, metaphor is quite interesting topic. So it definitely, like for me, well, I have a perception of myself, so I perceive myself as a poet to some degree. So I guess like it's an important part of my personality. I dedicated many years studying poetry, writing poetry, mostly in my native language. In English, I did very little, but still, I did something. I wrote maybe dozens or few dozens of poems, and yeah, I studied lots of them, and I memorized lots of poems. And now I'm working on poetry as well. Yeah, but in metaphors, it's like an interesting distinction in Lakoff's lectures is that there are primary metaphors and secondary metaphors, or general metaphors, or whatever the term was, I forgot. So, and to understand the language, it's essential to understand these primary metaphors, since they actually form they form the basis for all communication. So when you understand primary metaphors, you may not understand like generalizations, but you may be able to infer from generalizations to primary metaphors and understand their meaning if you understand primary metaphors. There are not so many it's, again, you learn most of them when you're a child without even communicating, basically by, living in the world. So you see, you interpret things in metaphorical sense. And yeah, I think I'll give this matter a little bit more thought. So it's not just, tomorrow I have a speaking club and we'll talk about it and then I shift to something else. I guess I probably read a book by Lakoff, but maybe not. I'm not sure now. Like, it seems that now I understand it well, and what I really need to do is just practice. And also, like, I want to put it in my kind of daily routine. So I want to analyze metaphors. So I want to do the work which Lakoff did on my own. So instead of just taking his metaphors and analyzing what he learned, I want to take my daily life, my daily routine, and try to understand like different metaphors, different fields, and apply them to my language, to see how I express certain ideas through special metaphors, and see what kind of metaphors are there. And again, look for English metaphors which help me to describe things in this way. And also I want to make some kind of my own metaphors. I was thinking about it yesterday when I went to the forest to run. I remember on the way back, I was thinking about reality, and I realized that in Russian, a literal translation of reality will be unstanding, not understanding, but unstanding. So if we translate unstanding, like it's a preposition, and then standing, it's gerund. So if we translate and then standing, we get a Russian expression for reality. So we don't say like the reality, we say unstanding. And unstanding exactly means like what's there. And as a comparison, like lie, for example, which may be also the opposite of reality. So truth, untruth, but not untruth, but lie. So lie in English, both in Russian and in English, it relates, it refers to, it's like a verb when you lie, basically when you're on the ground or on the floor or on wherever you lie. And it's very fascinating that, I was thinking about some values which people had before, and to stand basically means that you're kind of war metaphors or dominance metaphors. So a person who lies, he basically lies. He is defeated, and a person who stands, he is right. And these ideas, especially in some mythological contexts, like when a combat, when there's disagreement, so you don't argue, you basically fight with the person. So and who wins, he actually is right. So that's how you understand like what's true, what's untrue. So an unstanding means like you stand, so you can withstand. And if you lie, you're you don't stand. But anyway, yeah, it's just fascinating. But this idea of unstanding, I realized that there's not. Well, let's check it. I actually didn't check. I didn't check on the internet whether or not there's such idea. Unstanding. Outstanding, right? But no unstanding. I want unstanding. Give me unstanding. No, not outstanding. So there's no such metaphor like unstanding. Yeah, and I want to make it up, invent a new concept in English, which is going to mean reality, which is going to mean something like another word for reality. Yeah, I may build an entire philosophy on this. Like when I think about it, I may just take this idea and develop an entire philosophy based on this idea. And it makes a lot, like in Russian, so everybody will understand. So if you say in Russian, it sounds like на стоящее. So на on стоящее, it's like standing. So Russian verb for stand, стоять. And a gerund will be стоящее. So an on is на in Russian. So на стоящее. Настоящий, it's an adjective. So unstanding, it's also an adjective, which means that it's like real. And yeah, that's so funny. I mean, making new words and, see how they are going to work. Yeah, since it's an entire ontology. So when people talk about ontology, for example, what do they mean? Ontology versus epistemology. So you mean like being, something that's real. and epistemology basically relates to knowledge. So how do we know what's real? But if you create a concept of understanding, it's the same. Like, I may I don't want to do that, since it's not my nature to take one concept and work it out for 50 years. And I don't have 50 years. I think I'll be dead in 50 years for sure. So I probably have 20 years, or at maximum 30. And I don't want to waste all of them to like prove some theorem and then traveling the world lecturing some fools who go at universities and tell them the same shit over and over. That's what I don't like. Like it's like, for me, I want to go on. I don't want to stay at the same place. And I see that this is the case in most university professors. So they took lectures, they learned something, and then they repeat it over and over and over, the same courses to the different auditors. And it's so, and they learn very little after that. Whereas in my case, so I'm study a lot. I analyze the kind of like field, like let's say analytic philosophy. So now I'm beginning studying analytic philosophy. I don't think I'll study it for my entire life. And I think in 1 year, I'll be a kind of an expert level on analytic philosophy. And again, I don't want to become an expert level in terms of, teaching somebody else analytic philosophy. I want to study math. I want to study biology. I want to study psychology. I want to study sociology, all these different ideas. And I don't think that it makes sense to spend all life specializing in one field. Whereas if you know like one field, you go in another field, and it's always gets easier and easier to understand another field. It's like studying languages, for example. Now I'm aware that, let's suppose, if I want to stop studying English, I want to study another language. It's going to take much less time to study another language, since now I'm such an expert in studying languages. So I may study 10 languages, but I know that it's going to be superficial since I can't really dive into in 1 year, let's say, or in 2 years. So to get a grasp of language, it takes at least 10 years. And now I see it in my understanding of English, just 5 years. I know nothing. I know that there's like in 5 years, if I study for 10 hours every day, as I usually do for the last 5 years, or have been doing for the last 5 years. Yeah, in 5 years, I will go so far. I know that there's like endless amount of things which I want to study, and I don't want to specialize in one thing. And the problem with these guys, these professors, and this type of thinking, when you like learn something, memorize something, and then you just repeat it over and over, teach other people, you become so specialized, and you can't go on fast. That's the biggest. I also see it in myself. So whenever I study something, I think, oh, probably I can explain it to other people. I need to, just slow down, think deeply, write some articles about it, and conceptualize it in my own words, and then explain it. And it slows me down, since at the same time I think, why should I bother? If I can understand it, if I'm sure that, like, I watched this course of lectures by Lakoff, I see that I could understand 80% of what he was talking about. I mean, I could understand everything what he said, but in 20% of 20% of the information was unavailable. There was one lecture on neurophysiology, like he basically explained the theory of metaphor and our metaphoric understanding of the world, and he talked about the concept of grasping. So how we understand what is grasping through our like embodied neurology, the synapses, connections between synapses and between neurons, and so he basically talked about it for an entire hour, and I could understand probably like 30 or 40% of what he said, since I couldn't pay attention too much. But all the other lectures, basically, I could understand everything. And what should I really think about it on my own, and spend next month just trying to reformulate what he said and probably teach somebody else? No, I think it's a waste of time, since in this month I may watch like 5 other courses of lectures or 4 other courses of lectures, and basically enrich my understanding. And then if it's necessary, if I want to discuss these lectures, if there's somebody who really watched these lectures and wants to talk about them, I may just watch them at once at this moment and have a conversation instead of, oh, okay, like, I study something and then I go to people and I want to say, look, guys, we just, I want to teach you that. And then I see that basically most of the time it doesn't work. So if I talk about lectures, which I watched, even though I'm trying to present them as kind of, interesting and try to encourage people to, make their own studies, to say that it's important, that it makes a lot of sense. It still doesn't work since, first of all, my language isn't perfect and I can't really do it well. And second of all, since different people have different interests, and to impose some other, some lectures or some, ideas on other people and tell them, you have to study this, you have to study that. Yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Whereas again, if somebody really wants to discuss it, he or she may watch these lectures, and then we may, like, I may watch them once again, and we may have a nice conversation. So the point is, again, I don't want to remember anything. I want to do study in streams. So I like watch the course of lecture, then I do take some basic concepts from this course of lecture. So in this case, it was metaphors. Then I talk about it for a couple of hours. And while I'm watching, I'm trying to pay as much attention as possible. And also I'm writing my daily journal, and sometimes I reflect there on these concepts. And then I move on. So in this case, I may watch, let's say, well, if I do it with the same speed as I did it this week or this summer when I watched Cyril's lectures, yeah, I may basically watch like 15, 20 courses of lectures a year. And it's mind-boggling. It's like, it's way more than studying just at university. So I understand much more. And yeah, like in the opposite cases, I waste time and, trying to teach other people, trying to explain them what I have watched. Like, what's the purpose? To present myself as if I'm smart, or like, what's the goal of, like, for that? So if they really want to watch it, I may just point out and say these lectures are here. So if you are interested in the concept of metaphors, I don't want to explain you anything. Just go and watch this course of lectures. Yeah, probably it bothers me since every week I have 2 speaking clubs and I have to communicate with people, and often there are some questions and I want to express something, some idea, and then I want to do it better. I don't want to sound like an idiot. Then it makes sense to to get prepared, and that's why I want to like have some deeper understanding. So that's why I want to elaborate on the concept, not just watch it and forget it. But anyway, okay, I see I'm talking too much today. So I'm gonna finish here. Today it was the concept of metaphor, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be the speaking club, yeah, and day after tomorrow another speaking club. I prepared a fascinating poem for the speaking club for Sunday. Yeah, if you're live in Kaluga, you may come and see. It's going to be something unusual. Yeah, with that being said, let's finish here.